he is.
Welcome back. Now, let's talk a bit of education, because we can't really cover it all. Universal access to education has been a prime target for Nigeria over the years, and the country is committed to providing basic education to all citizens. You hear government talk about that a great deal. In 2008, the federal government, through the Nigerian Educational Research and Development Council, developed the 9-year basic education curriculum in schools by realigning all extant primary and junior secondary schools' curriculum to meet the target of UBE. In 2012, the 9-year basic education curriculum was revised and its implementation kick-started in 2014. Question is, how well have we improved on this so far? How effective has that curriculum been? And then, I don't know, still find them not being able to spell simple words.
Not being able to construct simple English sentences.
And that shows up at the university tertiary level. Okay, anyway, so to help us look at all of this, we have in the studio Annie Basieyo, who's an education specialist. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, thank you.
He actually trains teachers, he says. And Taiwo Salau, member Education Reformers Innovation Team.
My name is actually Adetola Salau.
Adetola Salau. Sorry about that. Okay, Adetola, so let me start with you. That question. So how well would you say this revision, which kick-started, in 2012 it was done, the 9-year basic education thing, then it kick-started in 2014, but how effective would you say it's been?
Well, we have a major issue when it comes to implementing policies in Nigeria. It always comes down to execution. Our execution has not been great. And Annie and I were actually having a discussion while we were waiting. And I said a huge part of the reform that we need to embark on here in the curriculum space has to do with moving away from our curriculum being focused on just our subject, but being focused on what the learner needs. It needs to be learner-centered. There are 3 forms of curriculum, and one of them is subject-based, the other one is learner-centered, the other one is problem-centered. We need to really focus on what the learner needs. You see in a lot of the countries that where they perform very well on the PISA test, their curriculum is really learner-centered and is really focused on what the learners will need when they come out in the workplace. And that's what our team, the Education Reformation Innovation Team, we're working on.
Okay. I'm sure your research has also told you what subjects would form what you classify as learner-focused.
Oh, yes.
What subjects are those, please?
I'm a learning scientist, actually, and I'm really focused on learning, research around learning. And I wouldn't really say subjects. I would say areas.
Okay, areas.
And there are 6 areas that we have seen: collaboration, critical thinking, let's see, communication, compassion. The 2, they'll come as I'm remembering them. They'll come. I'll recall them. But these areas have to do with how, being global citizens, and the other one will come.
Okay.
Yes,
okay.
And,
let's switch to Annie in the meantime while you search for that one.
Yeah.
Annie, you said to us before we went on air that you train teachers.
Yes. So not me particularly.
Yeah, I mean, you have an institution, you have a concern that does that. That's a very strange kind of business to go into because we have colleges of education all over the country. Why did you opt to do this?
Okay, so my previous background, used to be an investment banker, I'm a chartered accountant and a finance person, but we still need to teach. Life is a long life learning process. So in 2009, when we had the really bad NECO results, my co-founder and I looked at the Nigerian education value chain, and we realized that one of the areas where there were issues was actually the teacher. And it wasn't just the teacher in the sense of those that are out of service or pre-service that go through the colleges of education, but the ones that were in service. And the performance, we saw there was a huge conundrum. There were issues of quality of the teachers actually at the center of the training. So we did a lot of research and found out that it was mainly the government that was providing some sort of continuous professional development, largely through what you call the National Teachers Institutes, Kaduna. And we set up this private concern back in 2010. And between 2010 and now, luckily enough, we've been able to train about 20,000 teachers on continuous professional development and e-content to about 250,000 Nigerian teachers. The teacher is central to curriculum.
Definitely.
And we need to understand that the curriculum is really an instrument to achieve learning outcomes for citizens of a particular country or a particular society or a particular homogeneous group in the future. And in this context of Nigeria, it's not just about creating a curriculum, but also enabling the key stakeholders of the curriculum to implement it. So I hope I've answered your question why I went into training teachers. It's the important aspect of the value chain, and they're an important ingredient, and therefore we need to kind of ensure that we provide the services that enable that to continue.
Okay, staying with you, I'm looking at the 9-year BEC, as the basic education curriculum, and the basic features, core subjects, electives, and there's just one elective subject which is optional. Then there's another foreign language, pre-vocational studies, and then basic science and technology, religion, national values, and pre-vocational studies as composite subjects. The question is, the features of this of the 9-year BEC, do you think the role of the teacher was considered in all of this? I'll still come back to that learning curriculum.
Oh, yeah.
But let me finish with him as regards the teacher and this BEC.
You know, it doesn't matter how bad a curriculum is. A teacher, a good teacher, can implement and step down in a curriculum if they have the basics. When I meet a minister or a commissioner of education or a key stakeholder, what I often tell them is that it's not about these beautiful schools or laboratories. You have teachers in Kenya teaching under a tree, and the learning outcomes are far better than a lot of top-range private schools. So the teacher is an essential ingredient in that whole process. So I don't want to be so semantic about the issues of the BEC, the current curriculum. I believe that if a teacher is provided with a skill set, they should be able to implement that curriculum to some extent. However, the larger problem we have with our curriculum is not even about the teachers, I think. The biggest problem is we're trying to create a curriculum in a vacuum. The visioning is what is the missing ingredient. What are we really training for? Are we training for a Nigeria of 2030, a Nigeria of 2050? Have we imagined what Nigeria will be in 2050? Because you need to kind of have that leadership and that whole visioning. And that's not something that happens at the family level. It's not something that isn't happening at the ministry level. It's something that happens through a very robust and high-level economic planning team through the highest level of governance, you know, through the judiciary, through the Senate, through the executive, to kind of help us as a country imagine, envision where we're going to. When we know where we're going to, then we can build a curriculum. So, for instance, if Nigeria is going to become a center of ICT in 2050, then our curriculum will be skewed towards STEM, and even the vocational track will ensure that people who drop out at JS3 can go into coding, can go into social blogging, etc. I was telling someone the other day that one of our competitive advantages in Nigerians is branding. The average Nigerian may not have a substance, but by the time you see him or her and their business, they are well branded. So maybe that's a whole business. We could end up being brand entrepreneurs for the world. So if we don't look at what are we really planning for Nigeria, what is the Nigeria of the future, that's the missing piece. So one of the things you said where you want to talk about elective was agriculture. At the primary level, I believe it's introduced at primary 4.
Okay, just hold your thoughts there. We'll take a moment and we'll be back to continue this conversation. Please join us again. It's good to have you here with us. We're looking at the education situation, the basic education curriculum across the country. And just before we went on that short break, Mr. Bassier was talking about the question of vision, educational vision. What kind of nation are we building? What kind of people are we building? Is it Nigeria of the now, or Nigeria of 2030, or a Nigeria of 2050? Are we looking at a nation that's a hub for technology, for branding, or for what exactly are we seeing in our tomorrow? Well, let me come back to you, Adetola. The question of curriculum. Is it possible to have each state or region develop its own curriculum? Because I think at the same time, maybe, Aleo, you help us understand, at the same time, it looked as if some parts of the country had a curriculum that was focused on one thing and the other part were focused on the other, and they were all thriving in those areas. Is it possible?
It is possible to develop and drive, just like you said, having a vision towards, okay, this is what we want to do. So yes, it is possible for us to break out in whatever strengths we have and focus and gear the curriculum towards that. Because like I said, what curriculum is about is setting up subjects towards learning outcomes and making sure that you are delivering meaningful and effective learning. That's what it really is in essence. So you want these students to come out and become car manufacturers. You want them to become people who develop computers. Then you start building that from the elementary school all the way to secondary school. By the time they're in, we won't even call it a higher institution. Let's just be general. They'll be prepared. They'll be ready. So yes, it is possible to break out. But the issue is, are we beginning to talk and engage in conversations around that? I think it really comes down to, I know we say it comes to the national level, but it also comes down to us as a people. We have to decide, do we want this? Is this important enough to us? Are we thinking about what's going to happen to our children? Our children are no longer just competing here in silos in Nigeria alone. They are competing against people across the world, because the future now is freelance, and it means you're no longer sitting down in an office working by yourself. You're working with people all across the world. Sometimes you're working in this gig by yourself. In fact, I call it the gig economy, and I know a lot of people term that. I was at a conference in Europe, in Germany, and that's what we're talking about, that the economy now, the future, is the gig economy, which means you're doing this short amount of work, and then this is what you're supposed to execute, then you finish, and then you move to another one. They're going to be competing with people all across the world doing this virtually, on the computers, on their phones. So we have to start equipping them for that. That's the future of work.
Now, let me stay with you, Adetola. We often hear that our graduates are unemployable, not because they're not knowledgeable, but because their knowledge is not relevant to the requirements of the job market. What is happening regarding that? Are we changing our curriculum to suit the needs of the market so that when these kids get out of school, they can easily get jobs?
That's why I said there are three types of curriculum: subject, learner, and problem-based. We need to shift from being subject-based to being more about the learners and eventually problems. Because really what the whole world is geared around now is geared around problem solving. What excites us so much about Tesla, the electric cars, they solve the problem. Instead of us worrying about fuel for our cars, we can just easily charge them and plug them and go. So our children need to be geared in our classrooms to start thinking that way. And that's, in fact, we're talking about curriculum. Remember I mentioned the 6 C's? That's one of the things we're not doing. We're not raising critical thinkers. We're not raising creative thinkers. And he mentioned something which was one of the C's, constant learning. We need to also teach them that, look, you finish school, it's really not finishing the way we were taught it's finishing. You're constantly upgrading yourself. You're constantly learning. I'm sure he agrees with me on this. A lot of the learning that takes place nowadays is online, either by YouTube or these courses from these universities all over the world. You go there, you brush up on skills, you read. Even when you're reading your books, you're upgrading yourself. So we need to start infusing and imbibing our children with this. That's why they're not able to cope. That's why you're seeing these our graduates frailing and not being able to adjust. And unfortunately, what happens is a lot of these organizations, quote-unquote multinationals, they go and export people to come here to do jobs. Or import, sorry, export is out. Export, import, yeah. They go and import people to come in here and now take jobs. Well, I shouldn't do jobs. Do jobs that our graduates should be able to do. Yeah. So the key thing now is how are we going to make sure that we equip our children with those skills so that they are able to do those jobs, carry out those jobs.
And you spoke about the vision of where we want to be, maybe 2030, maybe 2050. Maybe you can give us some suggestions regarding that vision, because I readily think about India And I recall that all the CEOs of all the big IT companies in the world, they're all Indians from the Institute of Technology in India. I mean, what kind of advice would you give so that we'll narrow down our vision and focus on it?
I think there are many parts to the equation, but perhaps I start with maintaining the integrity of this geographical piece called Nigeria. And that means that we must celebrate our diversity, and we must see our diversity as a very strong advantage rather than as a disadvantage. So if I bring that to the curriculum, in the curriculum we have promoted only 3 Nigerian languages. But we forget that a larger part of the country are made up of minorities in south, in northern parts of the country, and we are not helping them imbibe their mother tongue. So we're not being inclusive. So in the Nigeria of the future, we need to encourage people to identify their mother tongue, identify their local identity, but still remain Nigerian. So I think that's something that should come through the curriculum from early years through primary education. The second thing is agriculture. Agriculture, we make so much noise about agriculture, but when you look at the curriculum, we are training people how to plant plantain, yam, and beans. But we're not giving people the knowledge about becoming agripreneurs, people who become, with the mindset of, let's solve our food security issues. Let's start to build competitive advantage in certain areas. Technology also, the research coming out shows that we have the scale for technology in this country, and that's another place that we could develop key components. So it's, in summary, one is peace and diversity, and just being confident as Nigerians and knowing our culture and our history. The second is now looking at streams of potential income where we could grow industries of the future. She's mentioned the gig economy that will be largely around technology. Logistics is a huge issue. And this country sits in a very vital strategic position to serve sub-Saharan, the West African market. So, of course, the knowledge of French is important if you are really going to break into those key markets right from here through Cotonou down to Dakar. So those are things we need to take into cognizance. Again, you look at a lot of our people are traveling to China to do business. Do they have a knowledge of Mandarin? Do we think Mandarin should be in our curriculum? So we need to look at things in that totality and not just copy a UK or American curriculum, but look at what will work and what will make Nigeria valid as a nation in 2030 and 2050. On the other hand, you have a lot of people in the nomadic communities, the pastoralists, the fishermen, the migrant fisher folk, and the migrant farmers. And under the SDG goals, we shouldn't leave them behind. How does our curriculum harness those opportunities? Those are things that enable us to create a proper visioning for educational roadmap.
Okay. You wanted to add something?
Yes, I wanted to add that while we're on that, one of the things that we're envisioning when we created this team, and he's a part of our team, our education innovation team, was making sure, just like he said, we don't leave any children behind, and creating a Nigeria that we all are excited and reverent about, like, wow, this is fantastic, and solving our own problems here. To me, that's endemic of everything else. We can't keep importing people to come here to say, oh, how do we do this? How do we fix this road? How do we solve our healthcare crisis? Let's empower our children and equip our children here with the skills to solve these problems here.
You'll be shocked what they're able to do, even at some very tender
yes,
ages. They're able to deal with some major problems. But the thing is, in terms of the content of our curriculum, when I went to the university, I was told by my HOD at that time that in the University of Nigeria at that time, before, 2 sessions before we came in, that was when the curriculum was changed. He said, you do 40 minutes of classwork, you spend 1 hour practicals on that which you did. You do, and this is a social science department, so you do 40 minutes, spend 1 hour practicals. You do 40 minutes, you spend 1 hour. So it's ingrained in you. But then it was changed and was now taken to another level. So it was now a national curriculum and we had to follow it through. That's why I asked the question about, is it possible to break it down? But the content. So, in the content of what we're in the curriculum we have now, you hear certain terms that our children may not be able to relate with. Some things about sexual education, some terms that are used there. How do you get our children to buy into this? Are these the things they should be learning now, or should they be looking at innovation?
Innovation simply is what people always think when they hear the word innovation.
Tech.
Oh, it's something tech and it's something new. Actually, innovation is just doing things differently. So this is how we're teaching our children. Yes, I just got a perfect example in my mind. We're so used to every year they give the children this textbook, and then the next year we take the textbook from them, another one. Why do we have to do that? Why are we still having our children carry around these heavy textbooks when majority of them now are holding these phones? We can put them on ebooks, and ebooks are easier for you to adjust and say, okay, there's a new edition, let's just change this, than you having to take that old book and then becomes redundant and then throw it away. As an educator and as a parent, just thinking of all those wasted books, it irks me, because I'm like, oh my God, all that knowledge, So imagine if it was on the phones or tablets, just quickly update them, they review them, and they utilize them. My son said something to me the other day about how he was so excited that now in the English class, instead of them focusing on writing notes, is more interactive because they're using the interactive board and the teacher is engaging them. They are coming up to the board, they're using it, they're going over the notes, they're reviewing. I'm like, yes, that's what it's really about. It's not about writing all those notes and flipping through those notes. It's about the students actually having a robust conversation about what they're learning and engaging with it. That's when learning becomes effective. And I'm like, yes, that's what we want to hear more of. That's what we want to see more of.
Okay, but what about the content that they are engaging with? Is that not a problem?
The content they're engaging with, it needs work. We all agree on that. And this is where what he said, I also work with teachers, I train teachers. Once we build the competency levels of our teachers, oh my goodness, a lot of things will really change.
Can I just hit on something so that the audience don't, I think the scenario she painted was very apt, but it's very reflective of urban private schools. So when we say innovation, I think that works well, but you need to always localize innovation. So in the village, in the rural areas where they don't have tablets and phones, there are other types of innovation that could come in handy. For instance, you have where again, it boils down to competence of the teacher, activity-based learning, using simple things in your locality to teach. You can use oranges and bananas. You can use sticks and what do you call it? Bottle tops. Bottle tops to teach basic arithmetic. So innovation doesn't always need to evolve a tablet, a handset, because there's a dichotomy in our education sector. We've got the private schools and we've got the public education sector. And we also have the rural versus urban divide, that when you go to the villages, there is a lot of resource constraints. But if our teachers the skill sets are developed, they can still work within the parameters of whatever they have to really upscale and ensure learning outcomes are achieved. Before you come to my question, you also asked about if curriculums could be somewhat localized. Curriculum should be learner-focused, so in that context can be localized. But we always are tracking national competitiveness and results and assessments. So if we depart from a national curriculum, say in Cross River State or in Borno State, then when you come to do common entrance or your key checkpoints are JSS and SS3, there'll be a lot of regional variations. And for that reason, we sort of must still have a national framework. And in the context of national policy of education in Nigeria, the federal government is responsible for that policy.
Okay. Now, there's a contribution from Guaman Dalong, and he says we need to emphasize less on speaking good English and focus more on making our languages more functional. Note that making a beautiful suit or coupling the most exotic car, crafting the most beautiful furniture has nothing to do with English language or grammar. We must find a way to henceforth make our languages instruments of functional education rather than languages of gossip. What I'm writing here ask the Chinese, he says, the Igbos have achieved success in this enormously.
He has a point.
But, point is, most of these exams still have to be written in English.
Communication, that's what I was going to say. Communication is one of the critical skills for the 21st century. So whether you like it or not, you must communicate in the lingua franca, the common lingua franca.
Yes.
And whether we would like to accept it or not, across the world, English is the most commonly spoken language. So
I have an idea. I think every Nigerian should speak good English. I think it's important because you want to compete favorably internationally. I think we should encourage us to have a good modicum of the French language because we're bordered by French neighbors, and if we want to control or do business in this ECOWAS region, French is important. I think that it's important to learn not just one of the 3 Nigerian languages. I think we should also encourage people from the 3 major groups to pick up one minority language, or at least catch phrases. So you go to South Africa, you see people that speak out of their 11 national languages, people speak 7. So I don't see why Nigerians cannot be encouraged to develop their mother tongue and at least learn one other language. So if I'm Hausa, I learn Hausa, but then I pick maybe Idoma. If I'm Efik, which I am, I learn my Efik word, but then pick Yoruba. What languages does? It builds diversity. It builds the linkages. So we should really understand, why are we learning a language? What's the purpose for it? It's to communicate, and it's to foster that connectivity.
The truth is that if you get to meet anybody whose language you speak, even if it's just a couple
Affinity.
of words, there's that.
That's why cohesiveness.
Immediate,
Yes, that's what I was thinking when he was talking.
Yeah.
Cohesiveness.
Yes.
So in building a united Nigeria, we need to get back to the language.
Yes, language.
Even though we all speak English.
Yeah.
But see this one. Victor Igbuji says, private teachers in Nigeria, especially in Abuja, where I work, are not under the minimum wage. Some earn as low as 15,000 naira.
Ouch.
And how would that teacher be encouraged to impart knowledge?
best.
Especially when the teacher knows that that child pays as much as 200,000 naira a term.
Oh, God.
So, no, I'm using, just let's use the barest minimum. Some even pay as low as 170,000 in Abuja, using Abuja, since Victor is writing from Abuja. But if a teacher knows that child's paying that much, and he or she is getting, without the necessary equipment to teach, he or she gets 15,000 at the end of the month, how would that teacher be encouraged to?
This is why one of the things that we're talking about in our team is getting the public to buy in to what we're doing. These parents need to buy in and also push that policy needs to change about how teacher welfare is considered in Nigeria. I agree. If somebody's earning that, why would they want to put in their best? And you do want the best for your children. Think about it. When you're taking them to the hospital, you want quality care. When they're eating, do you feed them junk? You want them to eat good food. So you want the best content in their minds too. If you're only giving teachers that, they're not going to give the best content to your children. So yeah, these are things that need to be changed, and those are things we're working on. But like I said, the public also needs to join, and there needs to be an outcry about this.
I think what the gentleman, I think you mentioned Abuja, is a private sector scenario.
Yes.
It's not dissimilar in the public education sector. In fact, a large chunk of the budget within the Ministry of Education goes towards the teacher upliftment. You know, because the teachers get enough pay, they have what you call a TSS, welfareizer and subsidized pay given onto the teachers. So it's a function of the profession. And the regulator, which is Teachers Registration Council of Nigeria, must work, and we must encourage them to strengthen the professionalization of teachers so that we have different types of teachers. I mean, everyone is not a medical doctor. You have a professor, you have someone with resident experience, and you have someone who's just a house officer. And the same way, it's the same thing that must happen in the teaching profession. Also, we find that because the public sector has not been able to fully cater for the needs of the citizens, the private sector has come in. And there are different types of schools in the private sector. In Lagos State, a survey was carried out with DFID, and it showed that a large population of teachers in Lagos, a larger population of teachers, were actually through the private education system. And when we talk about private education system, don't think it's just the Granges, the Avicennas of that you have available. You have a lot of smaller, low-cost schools that are providing quality education, access to good education. And it's a question of economies of scale.
It is.
You know. So we need to look at that in context of school fees, in context of the locality. But in essence, we must build the teacher capacity.
Okay, we will need to take a quick break here and come back to continue the conversation. Please join us. Good. Thank you for staying with us. Let's take some comments here. Emiola says, I think our leaders intentionally keep education budgets low, merry-go-round in strategy and implementation, because if we are learned, we will ask questions. When we ask questions, it will undermine their political paths. He says our curriculum is outdated and cannot support future development. What you say?
She's revising its sentiments of a lot of people. And like we said, I mean, yes, it does come from the top, but also we as parents, public stakeholders, should be making sure that we're building the capacity of our children in whatever forms that we can. Whether it means you're reading books to them, you're also exposing them to the best of what pertains out there.
I think when you look at the budgets, particularly the education budgets, the budget of the education sector is usually the second or third largest budget. But a lot of that is overheads. So we have a lot of personal overheads. And under the Federal Ministry of Education, you have 52 agencies that sit under that ministry. 52, yes. So it's a very large agency with a lot of administrative overheads. And it's not a function of the ministry, it's a function of our civil service. And until we imbibe on civil service and public sector reforms, these are things that would always recur in our budget. Right. So it's a bigger issue than what people think it is. Yeah.
Okay, weigh in on this one. Victor Ariola says Nigeria is confused about going Eastern or Western. Easterns don't educate everybody for outward exposure. Westerns educate everybody to find their level, either remain inward or outward.
Okay. I think it's even a function of a dysfunctional education.
I like that.
Yeah, function of dysfunctional, yeah.
When we think we must go east or west. I really respect Paul Kagame for, with all due respect, what he's done in Rwanda in the last few years has been remarkable. He's not gone west, neither has he gone east. He sat down to look at what Rwanda.
Yes.
And I think that's what we're saying, that we're well educated. We should stop imagining that the West or East should define us. We should pick and define what works for the Nigeria of now and the future. It's working in Rwanda, and people tell you Rwanda is a smaller country. Fine, it's a smaller country. So if it can work in Rwanda, then it should work in our 36 states, and by default, work in the larger Nigeria.
Okay. All right. See this one here. Olaolu Aleshinloye. I hope I pronounced that well. It says, I think it's important to say that total shift from primitive way of teaching to what is attainable in present day. It says, I wonder why my biology teacher would ask me to draw grasshoppers then, when Chinese students were busy practicing how to create equipment and gadgets. And he says 101% emergency should be declared in the education sector. So he's talking about what's obtainable now and what used to be.
That's the sad thing. What's obtainable then is still what we're using a lot of times still now. So that's what we're talking about, that we need to change. Last week, okay, we're still in last week. This week, I went to 3 public schools. Because, like he said, it's not enough just to go to the private schools. In fact, the heartbeat of what's going on, you see it in the public schools. And I'm still seeing our children still writing lots of notes, still talking about things that used to obtain in the 70s. And I'm thinking, why are they not talking to them about engaging their minds and questioning what they're learning? Why are they not talking about what's happening here? How do I go back? Iterate from the backwards forward. You know, why are they not doing things like that? Problem solving, like I mentioned earlier, because it's only from problem solving that you begin to create change. That's not happening. They're still drawing grasshoppers, like he said, instead of actually creating prototypes. And those are some of the things that I do with the social innovation enterprise that I have, I work on infusing and equipping our children with these skills. I talk to them about questioning, asking, making what they're learning relevant. Like, guys, you have to look around you for opportunities. You need to start thinking, because that's how you begin to see connections. You think.
You know, the first impression I got when I entered university was that there was no right or wrong answer. Give your answer and logically prove it.
That's right.
That's what I call thinking.
That is thinking, yes.
It may be the wrong answer to the teacher, but depending on how you marshal your points and your final conclusion, it may be the right answer.
That's right.
It shows that you are thinking.
You're thinking, yes.
And I think that, you know, we mentioned a lot of things here about the work environment, connectivity with the real sector. That's what the problem is. You know, you're involved in mentoring or interviewing youth. It's a challenge. There's the whole absence of responsibility, accountability, and critical thinking. And that's something that, you know, I keep saying the teacher is a central part of the curriculum. The gentleman did mention, why is he drawing grasshoppers? If a teacher feels that you are art inclined, and by drawing grasshoppers, you are engaging with the topic, that is a way of implementing. So it's not a one-size-fits-all.
No, it's not.
You know, it's really about how, as a teacher, you are engaging your learner in that. So you find some people, you know, there are different types of learners. Some learn by drawing, some learn by being left alone in the outside, some learn through enterprise. So his comment about drawing is not necessarily primitive.
If you look at where he's coming from, and indeed you harped on that, the fact that he or she is actually looking at, can we just move away from what is and look towards the future? You started that when you talked about what kind of Nigeria do we want to build. But you see, we've talked about the government, we've talked about the teachers, we've talked about policymakers. Let's come back in the next few minutes, look at the role the parents.
That's what I was alluding at when I was mentioning the power resource. Remember I mentioned that earlier? Yes.
What role can the family play in educating the child, even with the worst of curriculums, even with the worst of teachers? Many families do not pay attention to the children's education anymore.
So you want me to go ahead? Or?
Yeah, go ahead. Because you look like your father, mother. I do know how many strokes I got with the ruler on here for the 2 times table, the multiplication table. 2 times 1, 2, 2 times 2, 4. How many people do that now?
There are different types of parents in our society. We have very exposed parents. We have involved parents. We have parents who are illiterate. I'll start backwards. So in public sector or public schools, a lot of the parents who are, if I may use the word illiterate, do not even know what their kids need. You know, they're because the teachers and the school systems are not as supportive as they were 20, 40 years ago. So there's a whole divide about what does my child... They just know the children go to school, are they paying for an exam? But to what ends? There are no PT engagement in those typical grassroots public schools. So it's whatever the teacher says, whatever the school says. So the parents are not... Whatever the child says, the parents... Now, on the other hand, in our urban cities, we have a lot of parents that have outsourced the upbringing of their children to schools and domestics in the pursuit of the proverbial flea, as it were. And it's something that you as a parent, it shows where the value systems are, that maybe we value more of making money as opposed to a legacy. And I think it's something we need to look inwards. So the parent must play a role. Even in my kids' school, I hear people always complain. There's no perfect school. People always complain.
No, there's always something.
If you go to Eton, there's always... So as a parent, you must realize what is the capacity of your child. You must help your child discover their God-given talent and where they vision for your child, where they should go to or where they will go to. It's a journey. And when you find that journey, you help work in a tripartite relationship with the teacher and the child to enable that child get on his journey. And that is what brings the parent-child connection. Because when you leave your child out there, your child will one day become a man or woman, the connection will be there. The connection is in that discovery adventure, learning together. My son's tutor said something to me the other day, which is extremely poignant. He was like, each day your child comes home, ask him what he learned and engage. So it's not just about you went to school. What did you learn in science? Yes. How did you find it? children want also to know and share, their discoveries. We need to make it magical. We need to help them get on that journey together. And it doesn't mean that you need to have gone to Oxford or Cambridge to do that. You can do that with a simple, basic primary 6 background if you really have the love
I'm glad
and
that you qualified that, because I want to actually add that it doesn't necessarily mean that they must be literate to be able to engage with their children.
Correct.
I have been in programs where we engage with parents and we talk to them, and they were supposedly illiterate parents, but they really desired the best for their children.
Absolutely.
And they came and they listened, and they went back and they asked questions. So it really comes down to you. To me, the most important relationship is what he mentioned, the parent and child. So whenever we're talking about education, parents always remember that they are the center of it, and they are the first contact for their children. They are the ones who pass on their own values, their own desires to the children. Because whether we like it or not, they have such a huge impact on the children, both negatively and positively. So we can call them illiterate parents, but I like to say that it has to do with the mind. You're either enlightened or you're not. It doesn't have to do whether you've read a lot or you've not read a lot. Enlightenment is your mind. What do you want? What do you desire for this child? What do you desire for this child? Quote-unquote illiterate parents who are in the market, they ask their child, okay, what did you people do in school today now? Okay, what did your teacher say? They ask these questions. And they even ask questions to the to the teachers whenever they are pulled into the schools. I went to a public school of my ward, and I was listening to these market women, supposedly, asking questions about the junior WAEC exams. They were really curious. They wanted to really understand. And I said, see, people will just automatically dismiss them and say, oh, they are market women. I don't do that. I don't make those assumptions. I want to listen to each parent and now make assumptions. Because like he said, you do have, on the flip side, parents who are supposedly educated. I went to another school, a private school, and this mother who was a banker was telling me she doesn't have time to be coming there to be listening to us go on and on about her children. She had 2 children, an older one and a younger one. And according to her, she was really upset that the younger one wasn't keeping up to par with the older one. And I told her, stop that. You can't compare 2 children. They have totally different brains. They have totally different mindsets. So it really comes down to you.
Professor Imonoka Enakina says, reform all educational curriculum by starting from the basics, which is having one term in a season, have all stakeholders summit, implement the summit proposals, and aggressively fund the education sector and provide the students with good resources. When he says have one term, I really would like to understand exactly, have one term where all the stakeholders come together and you're discussing this about that in any way. We have 3 terms in a regular school session, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we do right now, currently.
So we should have one term.
I don't quite understand the question.
Yeah, but I think what he's trying to say, pay more attention to the working of the curriculum, even as it is, or if you're changing it, still pay more attention to it.
I think that any curriculum must be democratic. There must be democracy, the democratic process in the curriculum. And this is why we're having this issue, because maybe the curriculums are developed without the involvement of all stakeholders. It's not just the policy makers. It should be the parents. We should create a curriculum and have a consultative forum, kind of workship it almost at the grassroots down. Maybe that's what he's alluding to. Yeah. So I totally agree that we must have a working curriculum presented back to the Nigerians, at various levels. Workshop it right to the very bottom level. Get in input, and then it's going to be a bit more engaging. And that, I believe, is something that will work better. The other thing is that in our curriculum, I'm not sure a lot of people are aware that early years, we've been talking about basic education.
Yes,
basic education is the first 3 years of primary, the next 3 years of primary, and the last being the first 3 years of JSS. There's also the early years, which is 0 to 5, and the National Council on Education has it came out into the National Policy on Education in 2012 for implementation in 2014 that early years should now be something that is integral as part of a basic education. So hitherto it wasn't, but now it is.
So now we have the 9 years, but before the 9 years, you have the
Talk about the 5 years.
We should
That's
get the kids. Those early years are so instrumental to the success and trajectory of a child.
They are.
For the following reason: for special needs, that's when you carry out the best interventions, and also you get the child school ready. And lastly, that's where you embed the local identity and the mother tongue issue. So if that's really well implemented, it would reduce a lot of challenges on teachers in primary school, because by the time the child is coming in primary 1, there would have been sort of an identity. Maybe you're speaking Yoruba, you understand who you are and where you're from, and you have special needs was already picked up, and it enables a better transition point.
The question...
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that early years. Cognitive science has shown that that's the foundation for the brain being formed. A lot of what your brain matter is formed, connected. There are synapses connected at that stage. So it's really important.
When you talked about innovation, as in doing something new with education, okay, I asked my question, but this tweet just came in here that points to that. It said, my language journey at Emogbo Jerry says, educators try to be innovative with the topics, but are restricted by, say, exams, all this within 40 minutes. Beautiful. I do know that there are some climes where there's nothing like examination.
Yes.
There's just
Japan,
the learning
Finland,
and all of that.
Yes.
How does that tie into ours where you have intermittent examinations where you need to take it?
You have to be creative. As an educator, you have to be creative. Because I'm still an educator. As an educator, I tell them, even if it's 5 minutes or 10 minutes, in that 40 minutes, you bring in something that makes your students think. Either a short activity, a session where they're asking each other questions, a session where they're working together, because teamwork, collaboration, remember that was one of the 6 C's that I had mentioned earlier, is a huge part of the 21st century. We're not working alone. We work together. We have to work with other people. So it's really important that, yes, you have that restriction with 40 minutes, but you got to do something during that 40 minutes to make sure that you're moving our children to become progressive thinkers, that they're beginning to see things from the other perspective so they can do it. It's hard work. That's the thing. We need to stop staying in our comfort zones. We need to shock ourselves and do that work.
Do you want to say something else?
I think you just kind of said it all. We just have to be think out of the box, and we need to keep localizing. In being creative, if you really had a heart for the child, the people in your class to learn, you will find solutions. And the solutions don't always need a huge amount of money. The gentleman in the tweet, you said something about a retreat, a term, and funding. I don't think funding is a problem in Nigeria, funding as a sector. It's about knowing that we get money to the right projects. Otherwise, it just becomes transactions without outcomes. So we need to ensure that whatever money is coming in actually goes to projects that create learning outcomes and is positive outcomes for the education sector.
At that point, we'll hang it there for now. We're never done talking about education.
No, it never ends.
Never done. But thank you so much, Adetola Salau, Member Education Reformers Innovation Team. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Also, here is Andy Bassier, who's an education specialist.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sunrise will be back in a moment. I just had to chip it in there.